What is going on, everybody? My name is John Solo, and this is Messed Up Origins, and more specifically, Disney Explained, the show where I recap your favorite Disney movies and compare them to the original tales they were based on. Today we're discussing Lion King 2, a film that many call the best of Disney's direct-to-VHS sequels. That's not exactly saying much, but still, people call it that. As many of you know, back in March I broke down the origins of the first Lion King and the influence that Shakespeare's Hamlet had over it. In that video I told you guys that contrary to the overwhelmingly popular belief, The Lion King was not based on Hamlet from the start, but rather the archetypal hero's journey. And while that point remains true, I want to take this opportunity to expand on what I said, because about a month after making that video, I read something interesting in a book called Disney War. The following excerpt details some of the troubles the producer was having during the writing process and how he overcame them. Countless scripts had been written and rejected, and Katzenberg felt that the story wasn't gelling. Then, in the fall of 1993, a story artist mentioned that, you know, what you're really trying to do here is tell the story of Hamlet. Suddenly, everything fell into place. You're right, he exclaimed. Katzenberg urged that the dialogue be made more Shakespearean. In the resulting script, Scar, the king's brother and Simba's uncle, became a much more important role. In Shakespeare, Hamlet's uncle kills Hamlet's father, the king, so he can marry Hamlet's mother. The king's ghost returns to exact vengeance. In Lion King, Scar kills Simba's father, who later returns as a ghost, though the analogy probably shouldn't be stretched too far. Simba, unlike Hamlet, leaves his father's kingdom to find himself, weaving in an element of the biblical story of the prodigal son. So to reiterate, while the movie was not initially supposed to be based on Hamlet, when the creators realized how many similarities it shared, largely as a result of following that hero's journey archetype, they leaned into it, and even changed a few things about the story so it would resemble the play a little more. The reason I wanted to mention this, outside of clearing up any confusion I may have caused with my initial explanation, is that Lion King 2 was written with a Romeo and Juliet theme in place from the start, where a boy and girl from rival factions restore peace between them after falling in love. Today I'll be comparing and contrasting the two stories, but for me to do that most effectively, I first want to recap The Lion King 2 just so it's fresh in your head. If you haven't yet, do me a favor and give that like button some love, and subscribe with notifications turned on so you never miss an episode. And now, Solo Fam Squad Nation, without further ado, The Lion King 2. Summary. The Lion King 2 picks up immediately after the first one and follows Simba's daughter Kiara as she learns the ways of the Pride Lands like he once did. Only Kiara is having a hard time maturing into the strong, independent lioness she's meant to become because Simba won't stop helicopter parenting. One day, Kiara is exploring the Forbidden Outlands when she runs into Kovu, a lion cub who is supposed to be Scar's heir, despite having no relation to Scar whatsoever. The two escape the jaws of death together and bond over the experience, but due to beef between the Pride Landers and Outlanders, they're forbidden from seeing each other. Meanwhile, the shaman Rafiki learns from the powers that be that Kiara and Kovu are destined to be together and that their love will reunite the prides. Fast forward to a few years later. Kovu saves Kiara from a wildfire the Outlanders started to sabotage her solo hunt. To show gratitude, Mufasa allows Kovu to join the Pride Landers, but he remains skeptical of the young lion's intentions. Some time passes, Kovu and Kiara continue to bond and eventually fall in love, but tensions between the factions rise when Simba learns from Zira that Kovu has been trained his whole life to assassinate him. This all culminates into a brutal showdown between the prides, but Kovu and Kiara manage to break it up and convince the lions to put aside their differences, which are few, and join together. Meanwhile, Zira, who still refuses to make peace, ultimately ends up being killed. In the end, the Outlanders are accepted back into the Pride Lands, and Kiara and Kovu are appointed as Simba's successors. If you're familiar with the basic premise of Romeo and Juliet, then you probably already made some connections. For example, Kovu representing Romeo and Kiara, Juliet. But as I break down the Romeo and Juliet play, I'll be drawing even more lines between the two so you can see exactly where they took inspiration from. Then we'll be tracing back the roots of the play to compare to its original story. That's right, just like Hamlet, and as it turns out many other Shakespeare plays, Old Willie's Romeo and Juliet is an adaptation of an earlier poem. It just adds a few more characters, a subplot or two, and it's written in a style that makes you reach for the spark notes by the bottom of the first page. No, I'm sorry to say there's not a single thing I enjoy about Shakespeare's writing. I'm actually not sorry about that. It's not like I can't appreciate the man's work. I get why it's an important part of literary history and how it was so revolutionary for its time, but I just can't read it without thinking, hey Will, Use real words, or make this shit rhyme at least. Don't worry, Shakespeare fans, I'm not gonna spend this entire video hating on your boy. But just a warning, my breakdown of Romeo and Juliet is going to be laden with sarcasm because frankly, it's the only way I can get through it. So, the play's prologue sets the stage by introducing us to two families in the city of Verona that have had beef with each other for as long as anyone can remember. Then it states that from these two families will emerge star-crossed lovers whose deaths will bring an end to the feud. Spoiler alert. Then begins Act 1. In the very first scene, we witness a massive brawl break out between the servants of the two families, the Montagues and the Capulets. When the brawl is broken up, the prince enters and says the next person to incite violence because of that bogus feud will be sentenced to death. Then we meet the teenage Romeo, who's venting to his boy Benvolio that the girl he's fallen in love with has sworn to a life of chastity. Been there, my friend. In the next scene, we learn that Papa Capulet is arranging a marriage between his daughter Juliet and a kinsman of the prince named Paris. Papa Capulet says that 13-year-old Juliet isn't quite old enough to get married, but in 2 years she will be, and to get the relationship started, he throws a masquerade so they can meet. Only Daddy's plan doesn't go so well. Instead of falling for Paris, Juliet falls for Romeo, who is dragged there by his friends to help him get over Rosaline. Mission accomplished. From across the room, the two lay eyes on each other. Romeo lays a big ol' smooch on Juliet, and the two fall in love right then and there because hormones. But plot twist, they learn soon after that they belong to the rival houses, and their entire worlds come crashing down. And so begins Act 2. Act 2 is by far the most hopeful part of the play and where Romeo and Juliet's budding relationship really blossoms. You like that flower metaphor? Deciding that Juliet is totally worth risking his life over, Romeo sneaks onto the Capulet property so he can talk to her. While below her bedroom window, he overhears her expressing to no one in particular how much she loves him, and he calls out to her saying, "Yo, I love you too." The two then make plans to get married because getting to know each other even a little apparently, and Romeo dips. In the next scene, Loverboy approaches a guy named Friar Lawrence and asks him to consent to his marriage with Juliet. At first, the friar is hesitant, but he realizes that their relationship could bring an end to the family feud and agrees to it. Rafiki is the one who has this role in the movie. He facilitates Chiara and Kovu's relationship in order to unite the prides. By the end of Act 2, Romeo and Juliet are married and the two live happily ever after. Or at least until Act 3, which has a rather explosive beginning. See, back at the masquerade, Romeo was almost confronted by Juliet's cousin Tybalt, who wasn't about to let a filthy Montague mac on his own flesh and blood, but Papa Capulet held him back. In Act 3, Tybalt finally does confront Romeo in the street, but ends up dueling his boy Mercutio instead, and kills him when Romeo tries to break it up. As a result, Romeo snaps, kills Tybalt himself, and is then banished from Verona by the prince. Both he and Juliet are heartbroken over the punishment and spend their last night together consummating their marriage. Little do they know that at the same time, Papa Capulet is arranging a marriage between Juliet and Paris for a few days later. Because why wait until she's 15? She's basically a hag at that point. The next morning, Romeo descends down the balcony and bids his love farewell. Immediately after though, Lady Capulet enters and tells Juliet she's going to be married to Paris later that same week. Naturally, Juliet is appalled to hear this, but her parents attribute her response to her still being upset over her cousin's death. In my opinion, the arranged marriage element of this story is reflected in Lion King 2 by Simba's overprotectiveness and his desire to control Kiara. Of course, his behavior is a little more justified given the traumatizing events in his own childhood, but in the Capulet's defense, thems were the times, and unfortunately, we never get to learn the nature of their feud with the Montagues to see if it has any merit, though I doubt it does. In Act 4, Juliet meets with Friar Lawrence and comes up with a convoluted plan for her to end up with Romeo. First, she's going to agree to the marriage with Paris. Then, she's going to drink a sleeping potion so her family thinks that she's dead. Then, Lawrence will send word to Romeo so he's aware of the shenanigans and join the friar in Verona that night to rescue Juliet from her tomb. Gee, what could possibly go wrong? Well, Juliet ends up having to drink the potion a day early because her father moves up the date of the wedding. As a result, at the start of Act 5, Romeo learns from his buddy Balthazar that Juliet's dead before he's been made aware of the friar's plan. The way he finds out about it though is honestly hilarious. When Balthazar says, "How you doing, Romeo?" he responds, "All is well as long as Juliet is well." And Balthazar replies, "All is well then, for Juliet is well. She's died and gone to heaven, and I heard it's pretty nice there." Like, what kind of a friend delivers the news that way? At the same time that this is going down, Friar Lawrence talks to Friar John and learns that John never delivered the letter to Romeo because he was held up in a quarantined house. Lawrence was like,
"I'm too old for this.
and left for the cemetery to rescue Juliet himself. Later that night, Romeo and Balthazar go to the cemetery and open Juliet's tomb with a crowbar. Romeo enters alone, sending Balthazar away, but before he can get to Juliet, he's confronted by Paris, who had gone there to spread flowers on her grave. See, Paris holds Romeo responsible for Juliet's death since he killed her cousin, and it's believed that her grief is what killed her. He follows and confronts Romeo in the tomb, but Romeo ends up killing him. I didn't mention this character in my recap, but I think that Kovu's older brother Nuka was meant to represent Paris, as both characters had dreams they had no chance of achieving. In Nuka's case, it was to be Scar's heir and gain his mother's approval, while Paris wanted to marry Juliet. Also, ultimately, it's each of those desires that led to their death, so I think I'm onto something. Anyway, after Romeo kills Paris, he finds Juliet's body and proclaims to himself, "She's so beautiful, she doesn't even look like she's dead." Ah, very clever, William. I see what you did there. Next, instead of feeling for a pulse or checking if she's breathing, Romeo says, "Bottoms up," chugs some poison, and keels over next to Juliet. Mere moments later, Friar Lawrence enters, and of course, Juliet wakes up. He tries to explain to her what happened and how they have to get out of there before the guards come, but she refuses and he bails out. Then the poor, heartbroken girl gives Romeo one last kiss, pulls out his dagger, and stabs herself in the chest, dying in a pool of blood with the guy she knew for about 5 days. If you remember the Hamlet story at all, this one's ending is pretty similar to it in the sense that it's chaotic, but to put it simply, the lovers' bodies are found, their families are real sad about it, and agree to squash the beef. They also agree to build golden statues of each other's children right next to each other, and the story ends. Alright, so now we've gone over Lion King 2 and the masterpiece that inspired it. But what if I told you that masterpiece was not an original work? You'd probably say, "John, you've already said that. Get to the point, please." Well, while Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet in the 1590s, there was a story published decades earlier that he took inspiration from. It was called The Tragical History of Romeus and Juliet and was published in 1562. Written by English author Arthur Brooke, the events that unfold in this story are almost exactly like Romeo and Juliet, only it takes place over a much longer period of time, several months, and the character Mercutio is nowhere to be found. Some other differences are that Juliet's nurse and the apothecary that sells Romeus the poison that kills him are hanged for their involvement in the lovers' deaths, and Friar Lawrence leaves Verona to become a hermit. In Shakespeare's rendition, they don't face any repercussions. For a more extensive breakdown on the differences between the works, you can check out my sources section below. But now I want to briefly touch on the archetypes that make up this story. To start, the overall plot follows the tragedy archetype. This is when the protagonist has a flaw or makes a great mistake that leads to their undoing. Their unfortunate end often evokes pity, as they're typically a fundamentally good character. We can take this analysis a step further though and look at some of the archetypes used to create characters, and many of these apply to Lion King as well. Two obvious ones are the star-crossed lovers and hopeless romantic archetypes, which are clearly Romeo and Juliet / Kiara and Kovu. Another one is the wise mentor who the protagonists go to for advice. This is no doubt Friar Lawrence and Rafiki. We have the lawkeeper, the prince and Mufasa, who enforces the laws of the story's universe. Then there's the voice of reason, aka Romeo's friends, who are there to try and keep him tethered to reality and remind him of the repercussions of his actions. These characters are often included as comedic relief and to serve as a representation of normal so the audience finds the story believable and relatable. This is the only one I didn't think had a Lion King equivalent, and I think that's because it wasn't as necessary in that case. Kovu and Kiara both stay pretty grounded throughout the film, and are two of the only ones to do so. Other archetypes include the controlling parents, the wisecracking friend, and the catalyst, who causes the story's climax to be put into motion. That's just a surface level analysis of the play and movie. I'm sure if you dug deeper, you'd find even more archetypes at work. If you happen to know one I didn't mention, I'd love for you to comment it down below. In that, SoloFam Squad Nation, will bring this episode to a close. But before you go, I've got some requests. First, like and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode to support the channel and allow me to keep making content like this. Anyway, guys and gals, thank you so much for watching this episode, and especially for staying until this point and raising my audience retention stats. Don't forget to also follow me on social media. Handles are right in front of you now, and links are down below. I'll be seeing you all again next week. Until then, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.